Hey everyone, Icon here from Attack Magazine. In this video, we're going to show you how to use Chord Prism and make the most of its features. Chord Prism is an incredible MIDI tool that will allow you to play or record intricate MIDI chord progressions, bass lines, or melodies. Before we get into how everything works, let's look at a couple presets. The main feature is the Chord Generator that allows you to play full MIDI chords by pressing one key on your keyboard. Each white note on the left octave of your keyboard triggers a full chord that you can route to any software instrument. Here we're using the Euphoric Stabs 2 preset and routing the MIDI from Chord Prism to a phase plant preset. The MIDI routing is very easy to set up, as we'll show you how later on. The right side of the keyboard has two main functions. Firstly, each black key works as an arpeggiator or melody generator while you hold it down. You can customize these patterns to add a lot of variety. The white keys on the right adapt to the notes in the chord you're playing, allowing you to play single notes from the chord and/or scale. You'll see these changes when the chord on the left changes. The notes in the chord will specifically be highlighted. Let's test this out with the 11th hour preset and we'll use a Rhodes sound. I'm personally not a keys player, but I'm able to come up with some great stuff by just trying different combinations of the keys. This adaptability of single notes to the chords is called the Smart Scale feature, and it is a really innovative way to lay down MIDI while keeping the performance and playing aspect intact as well. When you press play in your DAW, Chord Prism starts to internally record MIDI as well, so you can drag and drop everything you did onto a MIDI channel. This would make it easy to fish out some nice moments or loops from what you played, for example. You can also see that the velocity responsiveness is very dynamic. Now let's talk about the Chord Generator, which is the essential feature of Chord Prism. In all presets, there will be a selected scale. For example, in this Assad major one, we're in C major. You'll see each white key writes the type of chord at the top, and the bottom indicates the scale, degree, or root note. Don't worry if you don't have that much experience with music theory. The strength of Chord Prism is that you mainly just need to use your ears. Below the keys, you have global settings for chords. This means that anything you change here affects all of the chords. We'll program a 4-chord loop to tweak some of the features. You can add a strum and set the rate. You can also add repeats so the full chord repeats itself based on the chosen setting. The gate control here is pretty useful. If you enable this hold button, chords will sustain until another one is played. The octave determines the octave of all the chords, and you can use stack to layer multiple octaves. Velocity adds velocity variation within each bar while your DAW is playing. You set a maximum velocity range and velocity pattern. I've chosen the up pattern, so now if I press play, you'll hear that every time I hit a chord, the velocity is going up as the bar progresses. At the bottom, we have the step sequencer. While using this, it's a good idea to enable the hold control, so we'll enable that first. You can have up to 4 patterns and change the steps for each. Tweaking the swing and gate is really fun, and you can add sustain to fill in the gaps between steps. If we drag out the MIDI to our instrument channel, you can see it's captured all of the gate, swing, and velocity information perfectly. This internal MIDI recording resets every time you hit stop and play in your DAW. There are a couple more controls here like the chord groups, black keys, and chord editor, but we'll touch on those in the next sections while building our own preset. Let's quickly look at how the MIDI from Chord Prism is connecting to our synth VSTs. We'll be looking at this in Ableton, but you can find setup instructions for each DAW on the setup page of the Chord Prism website. In Ableton, Chord Prism lives on its own MIDI channel. While it's active, you can load up another MIDI channel with your instrument and select the MIDI input as Chord Prism. You also have to select it in the second drop down here and set the channel speaker to in. Now when you record arm Chord Prism, it's sending MIDI through to your instrument. You can record your input to Chord Prism as a MIDI clip or also record arm your instrument's channel to capture all of the full MIDI as well. Or you can simply drag and drop the MIDI directly from Chord Prism to your instrument. Let's take a more detailed look at the Smart Scale feature. We'll use the Boom Bap 1 preset with a piano sound. You can see that the white keys on the right are changing depending on the chord you're playing. In the dynamic scale mode, it's laying out the whole scale and changing the start point depending on the root note. This is already extremely useful because you're basically unable to play a wrong note. However, we find that you can come up with more interesting or catchy melodies when switching this to the chord tones mode. With this setting, notes from the chord you're playing are spread across the keyboard and the order is not the straight scale order. The notes in the chord are again highlighted. You can use this inversion switch to lock all Smart Scale and Pattern Generator notes into one octave to avoid lots of octave jumping or very high notes. Of course, playing keys like this has a bit more of a random experimentation element involved, but you could find yourself coming up with many melodies that you normally wouldn't be able to. It could also be good for live performance with some practice. The bottom row of settings works the same way as in the Chord Generator. You can determine the octave, add stacked notes, add velocity automation, and use the step sequencer. We can also use the hold to sustain notes. One of our favorite Chord Prism features is that you can use multiple instances of it with different instruments, and all of the instances of Chord Prism will sync. For example, if we go back to our very first beat, we can see our Chord Prism routed to a pad launching chords. Now I have another Chord Prism instance routed to a bass, and you see it's automatically responding to the chords being launched by the first Chord Prism. This will allow me to use the continuously adapting Smart Scale to lay down a bass line. You'll just want to make sure you have the same preset selected. With Smart Scale, if I just play the C, this is always going to be the first note in the chord. Knowing that every note I play is going to be correct, I can get into some more interesting patterns as well. So far, we've focused more on chords and smart scale notes, but the pattern generators are also a huge highlight. We've loaded up a synth lead and are going to use a new instance of Chord Prism on the Piano House preset to generate some melodies. We'll program in a chord progression, but mute the chord output in Chord Prism to only hear the pattern generator. This will definitely help while using Chord Prism with monophonic sounds, for example. Now we'll draw out a long MIDI note with the G sharp note held that has a pattern on it. This already sounds great, but let's see how we could vary it. You can edit the pattern for each black note by right-clicking it or control-clicking it. There are two groups of pattern generators. The first one is ARPs, like this one. With ARPs, you can control the rate, octave range, chord notes, and of course the gate. Let's try a different ARP pattern. You can also duplicate these to other black keys with the copy-paste buttons. The melody patterns are less predictable than the ARPs and have different types of rhythms that you can experiment with. They allow you to determine how many notes from the chord are used to generate the melody. You can also sequence different black note patterns to have the melody constantly change. And use the sequencer to change the overall rhythm of the pattern generator. We've used a couple presets so far, but it's very easy to make your own preset from scratch. We'll load up the default preset and go back to a plain piano sound. The default is a C minor scale with simple triads. We can draw in a MIDI sequence that plays every chord so we can hear everything off the bat. This can loop as we edit. The chord groups are a great place to start because it sets all of the chords to a specific type. Again, don't worry about the theory and just go with what sounds good. This seventh drop root sounds good, so let's stay with it and just change up a couple individual chords so they're not all the same. We can do this in the chord editor. Whichever chord you last played will be highlighted and that will be the chord you're editing. You can firstly change the octaves of each note already active. This can help create some interesting inversions. You can also add additional notes to the chords, of course. Let's add a couple of ninths around, for example. The accidentals allow you to sharpen or flatten notes, and this will allow you to use notes outside of the key, but that's definitely more advanced. The black keys in this chord generator octave allow you to momentarily change the entire key of your chords. This will allow you to use borrowed chords or chords from different keys. For example, when I'm playing chords with the black E key held, I'm now in the E minor scale, switching over from our original C minor in this preset. Again, don't worry too much about the theory, but you can use these to come up with some really unique progressions. You can right-click the black key to change the root note it switches to, or change the scale variations. Some of the scales are really cool, for example this Persian one. If you go to the main settings by clicking the Chord Prism logo, you can also change the left black keys to change chord groups. You can again edit these by right-clicking them. Then you could add strums or repeats or experiment with the sequencer to save a couple of different sequences. For the pattern generators, you could tweak the patterns and come up with new combinations. Using hold in the pattern generator is useful because you can only press the note once and it'll keep holding. And then saving your preset is as easy as pressing the save button. All of your presets will appear in the user folder. Using the chord editor, it's also easy to tweak existing presets if there are some notes or chords you want to change. Let's change some in this Boom Bap 7 preset. Just as a note, you can right-click the main chord white notes to change which scale degree they are. This will determine the root note, thus changing the chord. Right-clicking the chord text at the top is a shortcut for changing the chord quality of each individual chord without going into the chord editor. Now that you know how everything works, we can use a preset to jam a bit. The goal is going to be to come up with an A section and a B section, as well as some melodic themes for both. We'll start with the EDM2 preset. We'll use a different patch for the melody. can slightly edit that. I'll just record on the lead instrument and hit record to manually record the MIDI from Chord Prism. That'll work. Thanks for watching. We really hope you enjoyed this video. Chord Prism is definitely a very powerful tool for coming up with ideas and even playing or performing ideas that maybe you wouldn't have come up with normally. For more resources, you can head to the Chord Prism website, where it's also available for purchase for $59.99 USD. If you have any questions about anything we went over or just want to get in touch in general, please drop a comment and we'll get right back to you. Just as a final note, please like and subscribe for all the latest content from Attack Magazine. Your support really means a lot. See you next time.